Well, welcome everyone. This is Charles Rayburn. I'm a customer success advocate, senior manager of customer success here at ServiceNow. Welcome to today's office hour. The office hour is all about Flow Designer from Paris functionality overview perspective. So we'll talk about practices, changes that have occurred, etc. We have a wonderful subject matter expert here, Brian Bimschleger, who's going to be talking to you guys about Flow Designer. As always, the format of our office hours are the first 20 to 30 minutes is all about the subject matter expert talking about from a best practice perspective and grounding us in the topic nature that's on hand. And the remaining time is available for all of you guys to ask any key questions. I would just ask that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window. I will ask those questions on your behalf to Brian so he'll answer those questions. And definitely, if there's any topic nature, things like that, that you would like for us to cover in future office hours, reach out to your advocate, as well as submit some information in our surveys. And this is how we put together these office hours in the future. So with that said, Brian, can you hear us okay? Can you hear me okay? I think he had dropped off and back in.
I can hear you.
Perfect. All right. Well, the floor is now yours. So welcome, Brian.
All right. Thank you very much. Nice to meet you, everybody. Hope you had good holidays if you're celebrating them. Today, as Charles mentioned, we'll be talking all about Flow Designer. I'll start off by talking about what has recently released in Paris. Some of the things we'll go into a little bit deeper than others, but we'll go over all the top key features, at least in terms of why they're important and what you can accomplish with them. And then if we have time at the end, we can give a sneak peek of some of what we are working on in Quebec as well. Certainly some of the features that we're starting in Paris, we are continuing or extending in Quebec. So it might be valuable to show what's happening on that front as well. As Charles mentioned, feel free to add any comments into the chat and we can answer those questions as they pop up. I plan to keep it about 20 minutes because if there are 50 plus of you that have joined this call, I'm operating under the assumption that you have some questions or you're looking for a better way to do things within Flow Designer. So with that said, just let me get something set up real quick and we can just jump into what is going on with Paris. All right, so I am operating under the assumption that you can see my screen right now. It says Paris Flow Designer at the top. This is kind of the laundry list of what is coming out in Paris. We'll kind of go through them one by one, but there are a couple themes that we were going for, and sometimes those themes aren't necessarily noted well within bullet points. But one of our big themes for us has been performance for Flow Designer, specifically for flows that have 50 plus actions on them. We know that the Flow engine itself is incredibly performant, but we frequently heard from customers in New York and Orlando that anytime you tried to open flows that were large, Flow Designer just started to crawl a little bit. So that's one of the things that we didn't necessarily bullet out on this screen, but is one of the notable improvements that we certainly think our customers are going to appreciate in Paris. Now, the second theme that we had in Paris and that we're really extending on in Quebec as well is providing more secure access to the product for non-admin users. And automation is becoming core to the workplace, not only for admins, but for non-admins as well. Standard members of the workforce just want to automate stuff to get things done. So we're trying to create an environment where admins or ServiceNow administrators or people in the IT department can create an environment within Flow Designer that is safe and secure for non-admins to be building within Flow Designer. The first item that kind of demonstrates that focus is persona-based access with flow access criteria. So what we are doing with this feature is you can create rules that define what content is available to users of a certain role. And when we say content, we're talking specifically about flows, subflows, actions, triggers, and steps within actions as well. Now, this is really cool because if you are an admin and let's say you have an incredibly intricate flow that handles a lot of security related items, or it handles really sensitive data and you don't want it being visible to other people, or you don't want other users who might not have the same familiarity with the flow as you can create a content rule that disallows other, or only allows visibility of that role to, only allows visibility of that flow to people with a certain role. This is also pretty nice because if you have more complex actions, whether it's connecting to servers or looping through a bunch of data, or anything that connects with external systems, you might want to limit. One of the use cases we've already heard of is for companies that want to limit Flow Designer use in like the HR department to only have Slack and email access and the standard ServiceNow actions. Well, now we have a way to do that. So this first item right here is pretty big, and it's all around managing what content people have access to within Flow Designer. The second one is run with role. Now this one is really cool because we can allow users who don't necessarily have sufficient permissions to run something. We can temporarily grant them a higher role so they can run that flow. When they trigger that flow, they can run it with a particular role. So this works really well in combination with our first item with flow access criteria. So let's say, for instance, as an admin, we have a particular flow that we don't want members of the HR team to access, or a flow contains actions that we don't want members of the HR team to access. Well, if we want them to be able to run this flow, but not grant them the actions, we could temporarily grant them with an elevated role to complete this flow. This is a really nice way to allow users to still, trigger off automated workflows without necessarily granting them the keys to the kingdom. So these two features are really big in creating a more secure environment for non-admin users. Now, the next one is decision table actions. These are going to be honestly pretty useful and can be a helpful replacement if you use a lot of nested if statements or complex if-else logic within your flow. The decision table actions, it references decision tables within the ServiceNow platform, and ultimately allows you to get one or many results out of a particular action. So anytime we get to that point within a flow, we can evaluate certain criteria against a particular decision table and get our response back and continue with our flow. It's a pretty elegant solution for dealing with really complex conditionals. Now, we have improved catalog support as well. We won't get into these as much, other than to say that these were some of the most requested items that we see on our idea portal, is really tightening that connection between Service Catalog and Flow Designer. So when we get into update and delete multiple, these are going to be steps within actions. So one of the things we found through testing with a lot of our customers in observing how they build flows is we found numerous instances where customers would need to perform some actions on a bunch of records. So they'd be creating small loops to loop through like an array of records, but always updating the exact same field, perhaps updating the status or the state on a handful of records, or going through and modifying the short description on a handful of records. Well, we now have steps and actions built in. So you can pass in an array of these records, and you can update the same field on all of these records all at the same time. And we also have a couple of Flow API enhancements. So one of the biggest items here is this get output via context ID. So via the Flow API, we can pass in that context ID and we can get the result of that flow. So we can get that the flow outputs that, within a standard flow, you can define certain flow outputs. So this one is pretty helpful if you have multiple flows that might link to each other or might operate in isolation, but you want to get values from one before continuing another. Those are really kind of the big improvements, again, with the notable exception of performance overall, which isn't bulleted out right here. But in terms of the new features that are added, we really think that the access related items, whether it's flow access criteria or run with role, are really huge and should enable this new wave of citizen developers to safely use the Flow Designer product. And we're continuing to improve our service catalog support, and then smaller fine-tuned actions like update and delete multiple items. Now, when we get to our kind of smaller improvements, these are things where we're kind of tightening the screws on the product, or quicker wins that help out our customers in smaller ways, relative to safe and secure access for the Flow Designer product. One of the items that was really small that we've added, but in early testing our customers have found the most useful, is the duplicate action. We've found through a lot of testing with our users that a lot of times when you're building flows, you use the same actions over and over again. Whether it's a part of a conditional or it's part of a loop, or you just constantly trying to look up a record or delete or modify a record, or adding in a log statement, sending email, whatever. It's a pretty frequent occurrence for users to use the same action multiple times within a flow. So now we actually just have a duplicate action button directly on the Flow Designer canvas. So you can hover over any action that you've already added, and you can click duplicate, and it will copy all of the contents of that action as well as the action itself. So if you have a particular email configured that you want to send as a notification once you get to some point in a loop or a conditional, if you hit duplicate on that, it will copy all the to and the CC and the subject and the body with it as well. So this is really useful for building out flows that use the similar actions. And the next one that we think is a big deal, at least for readability, is flattening out the action numbers. And what that means is on the left-hand side of Flow Designer in pre-Paris versions, we'll have items where,
I didn't make the sandwiches, period. You didn't.
We're good to go. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. Let's see. Flattening out the action number. Yeah, flattening out the action number is really interesting, and it helps from a readability perspective. We noticed that when customers were building really complex flows, so with nested looping, nested logic, a lot of nested steps in that would go deep many levels, our numbering system of action 2.1.1.1.3 could get out of hand pretty quick and didn't really map with the amount of space that we had allocated to the numbering on the left-hand side of Flow Designer. So switch to a flattened numbering system where anytime you add another action to the canvas, it just increments the step by one. So all of our actions are action 1, action 2, action 3 now. So they all have kind of a unique single number and they don't have any dot notation. And then this next one is ghost actions. It's a little bit of an edge case, but it was a scenario that we were running into when customers were bringing flows in from subprod into production instances, where let's say you're bringing in, you design a flow that has a particular spoke or particular action on your subprod instance, and you bring that into your production instance, but you don't have that particular action or spoke. You don't have a particular action or spoke that is contained within the flow. Well, before Paris, Flow Designer would kind of freak out a little bit and not exactly know how to handle it. But now with Paris, we have what we are calling ghost actions, where there will be a representation of the action that you don't have set up in the flow, and it will be informing you that something should go here, you just don't have it. And in most scenarios, we've found when customers are in this situation, they're in control of both the subprod and the production environment, so they can pretty quickly triage which action they are missing. But this allows that flow to effectively be recoverable. So if I import a flow and I don't have a particular action, once I install that action on that instance, then my flow will be back to normal. So this is pretty handy when moving flows between instances. And then the last two items we have here are a little bit more of exception handling and how to handle items when things go wrong. This is kind of an introduction that we have into handling errors and exceptions, and it's on a very, very specific basis. And we'll actually be extending this type of functionality across all actions within Roam, or at least that's what the tentative plans are right now. But this allows you to set particular timeouts for a wait for condition. So you're just not waiting forever for some condition to happen. If you have a step or an action in your flow that's wait for a particular condition, you can have it time out after a day, a week, etc. And then the lookup record catch failure. Before Paris, if you attempt to look up a record and it doesn't exist, or there are a couple other circumstances where it might fail, like if you're requesting from a particular table and table has an odd setup, it would fail and you'd just kind of be stuck. But now we have a way to gracefully continue if there is a failure on the lookup record action. So those are a couple of the smaller improvements that we have on the right, and that, as mentioned at the top, there are a couple transform functions as well. I think the main one that we added in Paris was key value mapping. We have documentation on it, but it allows you to kind of customize values, I believe, if you have a JSON object or a complex object that you're passing in, you can transform it to override particular values. So that is Paris overall. It's a kind of a oversimplification of the hard work that the team has put in. But again, the big themes have been in performance. So handling on the front end complex flows that have 50 or more actions, and also managing content and secure access for non-admin users. And then third, improving the support with the catalog builder. I know that was kind of a lot to go over, and when we've talked with customers about our Paris functionality before, normally there is one or two of these features that is particularly more interesting than another to them, kind of based on use case. So I suppose what we can do right now is open this up to questions and just answer any questions that you have about what's coming up with Paris or any best practices. And then if we have time at the end, we can give a little sneak peek into what's coming with Quebec as well.
Great. Well, Brian, I do have a question in the chat window from Ryan. How do you avoid having workflows built and understood by folks that subsequently leave the company? This is a long-standing problem of allowing our colleagues outside of IT to create workflows in Excel, Access, Slack, etc.
Avoid having workflows built and understood by folks that subsequently leave the company. Yeah, one of the things that we encourage from a best practice, at least within Flow Designer, is to use the annotation feature. So when you are in Flow Designer, you can annotate any particular action that is on the canvas. I myself, when I build workflows, I use that to effectively act as comments for what I'm trying to accomplish at a particular step. Within any large enterprise organization, sometimes it's hard to manage who, what happens when employees move on and leave, what happens to their work and their stuff. But I'd say from a best practice flow designing perspective, using the annotations to describe what is happening at each step or what you're looking to accomplish at each step is really useful when new users or other employees need to look at the flows that you're designing.
Okay.
Can we require annotations? That's a good question. I don't think so, but that is something that I'm going to have to go back and check on. Ryan, admittedly, that is the first time I've been asked that question, and I think it's a really interesting one.
Great. All right. Other questions from the field? Now's that time to go ahead and type in a question, or if you want to unmute, go ahead and ask your question point blank.
I have a question. This is Melanie. Can you talk about when best practices from when you would use Flow Designer versus a workflow? Just maybe talk about why it's more important to use Flow Designer versus when it's best to use a workflow.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question, Melanie. This is a question that we get a lot. And probably it's understandable that we would get the question a lot because we have two tools that do relatively similar things. We automate processes, kick off something, perform some actions, and achieve some outcome. What I can say from our recommendation is if you're building something new, we'd recommend building it in Flow Designer. From a feature perspective, once Quebec launches, Workflow and Flow Designer are effectively at parity. They can accomplish all the same things. Sometimes there's a different way to accomplish the same thing, but from a functionality perspective, they'll be comparable. The key difference is we are continuing to support the workflow tool, but we are not enhancing it. And we haven't enhanced that product over the past 2 years. So for a lot of the functionality that we're releasing today, like persona-based access or creating secure environments to run with a particular role, and a lot of the concepts that we're building out in Quebec and we're planning on for Rome to take advantage of those concepts and that functionality, we'd recommend building on Flow Designer. Did I accurately answer your question?
Yeah, you did. You actually did.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. So far, I don't see any additional questions in the chat. Who would like to ask a question point blank then? Thank you, Melanie. Silence. Brian, I guess if you wanted to go into some of the items that are in Quebec, maybe that might spawn up some time for them to kind of have some questions thought about.
Sure. Let's. Oh, well, we did have one more thing for Paris. Now, admittedly, I'm the PM for Flow Designer and not for Integration Hub, but some of these features coming up for Integration Hub are pretty important. There are a lot of things in here that are extensions or updates of existing functionality. But one of the big ones is a data stream from a source. So if you're trying to get a whole bunch of records, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records from an external source, this will allow you to batch them. So instead of timing out the entire system, waiting for all your content to be imported, you can grab a certain amount at a time and process them. This is really good for switching over between systems or updating directories of information. Multiple active connections is really good. For example, if you have multiple Slack instances and you want to be able to have active connections for multiple Slacks at once, or your company has 2 Box accounts for whatever reason, or there are 2. Most of the time when we see multiple active connections, it's with messaging tools or document storage. But this makes it easy to have multiple active ones at the same time. Now, the big one in here that we found customers enjoy the most, at least in early testing, is the JSON Parser step. So JSON Parser will allow you to take an input of JSON during the Action Designer process, and you can map that JSON to a complex object within Paris. Now, what that means is that from an output perspective, your action that you create on the Flow canvas can output JSON represented as your data pills. So this makes it really easy to use like a JSON output from some previous step or something that you get as a result of an API call and get that into a usable format with data pills. This one is really handy to use and makes connecting with external systems a lot more friendly once this is configured correctly. There are 2 questions since we last chatted. What things cannot be done in Flow Designer that you can do in workflow? It's a good question. But I'm trying to think because with each release we knock a few things off of the list. There's one particular nuanced action. One of them is the rollback action, where you can roll back a workflow to like a state at a particular point within the workflow. That is not directly supported within Flow Designer, but using loops and combination of different methodologies, you can kind of create the same effect. That's one of the big ones. I'd have to check on what the other one is, but there's one other particular feature that is not supported, but we hear about it from customers so infrequently that it's not top of mind right now. So I can double check and get back to you after this call. The next step, how would the JSON parser step handle name value pairs that were not present in the original payload? Yeah, this is a good question. So the way that the JSON parser best works right now is you'd want to have some sort of example of a standard payload that you would be getting, because you handle that mapping of the keys to data pills at one time during the design experience. So you'd want to get an example of a standard output that you would have, and map that the initial time, and then kind of go from there. Now, if you have JSON output that has arrays in it, where you could have an array of objects, and you could have anywhere from 0 to n objects, I'd say make sure your example JSON output has at least one of those objects, and then we know how to map it for the rest of the number that come in future payloads. Cool. So jumping ahead to Quebec now, I know this is a little bit in the future because obviously what this call about is in Paris, but Quebec has some really interesting features that are coming through. The first is, well, I suppose talking thematically, again, one of the big focuses for Quebec is enabling citizen developers who have limited programming experience, but have some level of technical aptitude to be able to create automations. App Engine Studio is going to be a standalone product for low-code users to build applications, including the data model, security, automations, etc. And Flow Designer is going to be a part of App Engine Studio as well. So everything you can do in Flow Designer, you'd be able to do within App Engine Studio, which would kind of allow for a controlled, streamlined environment for low-code builders to create applications. Secondly, we hear a lot of feedback that Flow Designer can be a little bit difficult to understand how to use, especially the first time you're introduced to it, particularly for users who don't have as deep of a technical background. So with this release, we are introducing guided tours. So kind of popovers that help indicate what the user can do within Flow Designer. We have templates that the user can build new flows from, and these are for simple but common scenarios. So send me a notification when thing X happens, or when this particular record gets updated to this particular value, go do this thing, or a standard service catalog approval request workflow. And then finally, we have embedded help. Embedded help is really cool. We found through testing that when people are building out flows in Flow Designer, they frequently have Flow Designer open in one tab, and they have a knowledge base or documentation open in another tab. With embedded help, what we are doing is bringing that help for each action, each standard ServiceNow action, directly onto the canvas. So if you add an action to the canvas, you'll get a little help icon. And when you click on it, a side panel opens with all of your help content available for you. So you can be building and referencing the documentation all within one screen, so you can stay focused. In terms of usability improvements, we're updating our logic, how we represent if statements in particular, to more clearly represent what is happening. We have repeated feedback where users don't fully understand how the power if statements are working, because we don't necessarily require that you mandate, or we don't require that you add an else or an else if. You can just kind of have an if and a branch and kind of be done with it. And particularly when multiple if statements get nested together for chaining complex logic. We heard repeated feedback from customers that it was difficult to understand when certain branches of logic ended, or what happened when you end a certain branch, and where do you go once a certain branch completes. So we have a couple improvements, mostly from a visual perspective, to help communicate what is actually happening from a logic perspective. Now, with the action picker, if you remember in Paris, we talked about duplicate action. People are picking the same actions relatively frequently, or they use the same action over and over again at various points of the step. We're updating our action picker to have 2 new categories now, the first of which is recently used. So it will contain your top, or the most recent 10 actions that you, the user, have used within this action picker. So if your organization has a whole bunch of different spokes, different actions, etc., you can save all of your time from browsing or searching or digging in, and you can go back to your most recently used. We also have most popular. So this is to help most popular is the most used actions within your organization. So this is valuable when a new spoke might get added and new actions are made available to end users. If one developer or one admin starts using that spoke pretty heavily, it could appear in most popular on a different user's action picker list. This is a valuable way to discover what other people in your organization have been using without the need of some formal notification. Now, in this other category, we have feature access criteria. And if we zoom back to Paris, we had content access criteria. So feature access criteria and content access criteria are 2 parts of the whole, right? Content access criteria allows you to define what content, flows, subflows, actions, triggers, etc., are available to users with a certain role. And feature access criteria allows you to define what features are available to users with a certain role. Now, this one's super valuable because the features that we allow users to control are certain visibility of buttons, ability to take certain actions. So the example we like to provide that kind of shows the value, perhaps we want to allow some low-code developers or some business users the ability to create flows, but we don't want them to publish the flows or activate the flows. We still want the activation process to be like a gate for the IT or the admin team. Well, we could create a role that just simply doesn't have access to the activate or deactivate button. So users could get in and build whatever they want, but when it's actually time to activate it, they would have to notify an admin to review the flow. This is just another way where we can customize the end experience for users who might not need all the keys and all the power of Flow Designer. So if you take the time to configure it, content access and feature access are really powerful tools to customize the Flow Designer experience for end users. Now, finally, the big one that we always get questions about, and we had a question in the chat earlier today. What is something in workflow that's not in Flow Designer? Well, I specifically omitted talking about scratchpad variables, which are temporary, arbitrary variables that you can set We are introducing flow variables into Flow Designer in Quebec, which allows you to create your own variables, which in turn create data pills. And you can set their value to whatever you would like. So they start off as null, and then you can set and update and modify the values of that data pill however you want throughout the course of your flow. This is one of our most requested features, and it was actually supposed to be ready to go in Paris, but we had some kind of last minute challenges with team capacity. So we're really excited for this to be out, and I played around with this feature for a couple of my own automations, and it makes certain things much simpler to accomplish. So yeah, these are kind of the big four areas for Quebec. Now, understanding we've talked about Paris and we've talked about Quebec. Any questions about what's coming?
So far, I'm not seeing any in the chat window, but really interested in the whole flow variables. That's just my opinion. This is Charles. So.
Yeah, flow variables is flow variables is the thing that makes any type of looping or recursion a lot easier.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And definitely the embedded help. And I'm wondering if a lot of you customers on the line, are you guys finding the ability to get what you need to help kind of build out some accurate flows, things like that, pretty successfully? Do you think and see embedded help as something that's going to help enable that even better? Like to see some of the more about information around those templates that are there. Anything to kind of help you guys be that much more successful in using Flow Designer? Definitely speak up. Or is it that easy to use?
I would just say I think the individual or just having the help at your side would be very helpful, because the first time I built it, I struggled a lot. I got through it, but it's a lot because the concept is totally different. So, but to have those guides and help would be beneficial.
Great.
Yeah, and the guided tours, whenever they are available, they appear in the help panel for you as well. So within that help panel, we have kind of general help content on how to build your first flow, design your first action, use logic, that type of stuff. But then when you click on help for a particular action, it will detail like, okay, here are the inputs and outputs for a lookup record action to help you guide through that process.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to the templates as well, because I think that would be beneficial as well. Just have a guide, something to work from and then build upon. So.
Perfect. Great. Oh, question in the field from Laurel. Do you envision FD replacing workflows? So Flow Designer replacing workflows in the service catalog request fulfillment space? And definitely, obviously, I'm not a developer. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I'd say for many of our customers, they're already using Flow Designer for items like this. So service catalog, request fulfillment. I know we internally are using Flow Designer for request fulfillment. One of the things I would also say is that eventually, at some point in the distant future, we will be sunsetting workflow as a tool, but we always give 18 months heads up when that's about to happen, and we haven't determined a date for that yet. So my unofficial guidance there is we're probably like 2 years out from that. But in terms of what like the long-term vague roadmap is, eventually you'll want to use Flow Designer for this type of work and any automation work that comes up.
Great. Okay. And then Terry, when you sunset it, does that mean any being used will stop working, or we will just not have support for fixing any issues? So sunset for the, I guess, the workflow engine.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we would need to figure out whenever we decide what the sunset date is. We've been looking at a couple different options, like, would it be possible to build a tool that could, convert workflows into Flow Designer, or like how do we handle support and things like that. All I can say right now is we're not sure. But I'd put it like this: when we do decide to sunset workflow, we give you at least 1.5 years heads up, and by that point we would have a comprehensive plan for what support and transition and all that would look like. So sorry, I don't have more depth and detail for you right now, but be assured that when we do announce it, we will definitely have those answers.
Great. We have about 5 more minutes left. Any last minute questions for Brian around Paris functionality related to Flow Designer, or Quebec features, or even for those who are still using Orlando, any current questions or comments related to Flow Designer? All right, I'm going to start the countdown. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for your time today. It was a pleasure having you discuss Flow Designer from a Paris functionality perspective, and very excited about to see the Quebec items that are coming. Definitely for all of you who are attending today from a customer perspective, thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening to the recording, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your success advocate, and we'll try to get you some good best practice materials and guidance on your Flow Designer needs. Well, thank you all so much. I'll send out the recording as well as the survey after available. Thank you guys so much. Take care. Bye-bye.